I was in trucking full-time for roughly 40 years, and through those 40 years, I made a good living. I was careful who I pulled for. I knew when to hold them and when to fold them as far as getting out when some trucking companies were getting bad. But for the most part, I was lucky enough to work for small carriers, privately owned, family-owned trucking companies. They treated me well, and they paid me fairly. Now, that's not to say that I didn't try a few big carriers. I tried two, in fact, and both times it didn't work out. I may not have graduated in the top of my math class, but I was smart enough to know when I was being cheated. So I didn't stay very long at either one of them, and then I got out. But in my 40 years of driving, I experienced a lot and I saw a lot. And one of the things that I experienced was being talked down to by shippers and receivers and occasionally even trucking companies when I was with big carriers for a while. And I didn't care for that at all. And I didn't stand for that. I always was able to stand up for myself. But it's hard when these mega carriers treat their drivers like dirt, and it sends me to the moon. I remember a couple times. I remember once pulling into Little America, and I found a spot at the back, and I parked, and there was a Prime truck that pulled in a couple spots over from me, and out of this little Prime Freightliner got an entire family, a mom, dad, two kids, and a dog, and they were all packed into this little truck. And I got talking to them for a few minutes, and they were on the Never Never plan with Prime, and their paycheck for last month had been a couple $100 by the time that Prime had took all the expenses out of them for the truck and the fuel and everything. They were left for a couple $100 to support this family of four, and that evening their plan was to cook one of those TV dinners on the engine. And I don't know if any of you guys remember those, but they used to sell like a little TV dinner in the truck stops, and you could heat up your engine and cook your dinner on the motor. So I don't know if you guys can imagine macaroni and cheese that smelled like diesel fuel, but that was their plan for supper, because that was all they could afford. And I remember thinking, I felt so bad for them. Another time I remember landing at this plant in Indiana, and there were 3 Schneider drivers, bobtails, sitting there waiting for their trailers to be loaded. They'd been there 3 days, and they were living out of the vending machines, the candy machines, in the lunchroom of this factory, because Schneider's wouldn't allow them to bobtail 12 miles into town to a restaurant. Probably not that they could have afforded to go to the restaurant anyway. But that's what these guys were doing, living out of the candy machines in the parking lot on day 3, and I remember just being dazzled by that and thinking how badly that Schneider was treating these guys, not even allowing them to bobtail to a restaurant, let alone paying them for their 3 days sitting there so they could at least afford to eat. It just wasn't right, and that's the kind of thing that just drives me nuts. Look at this business with Michael Boglin a few years ago. Goes to deliver at Threisenkrupp, and they're in the middle of a ghetto, and they won't let him in the gate at night because they've got a rule against it. So this poor guy has to sleep outside the gate in a ghetto, and it gets him killed. Stuff like that's just got to stop. That's just wrong. And that's part of what I'm about. I get on here and I complain because truck drivers are hardworking people, and people deserve to be treated better than this. No one deserves to be treated that way. And it's hard to miss all the examples of this that you see every day. You go into the truck stop every night, look around, there's tens of thousands of these guys just living on pittance. Just no food, they can't afford to eat. There's drivers been sitting there for days without being paid. Owner-operators broke down and going broke. Guys that have been abandoned by their trucking companies, like these guys with Aero truck lines, just dropped there and left there to rot. It's inhuman treatment, and it shouldn't be allowed. Truck drivers that are on the Never Never plan and have lost their trucks, and there's all sorts of those guys too. Truck drivers are the backbone of this country. The economy grinds to a halt without us. So I don't think it's asking too much for a little respect and some decent pay. rather than being cheated by these mega carriers every time you look at your pay statement. We deserve better than that. You know it, and I demand it, and so should you. Under the mega carriers, trucking has gotten to look a whole lot like slavery the last few years, and that's just got to be stopped. That's got to come to a grinding halt right now, and that's part of what I'm about at Smart Trucking. One online publication that I read a few years ago now referred to trucking as a sweatshop on wheels. And as sad as it is, that was a pretty apt description of what's going on lately. So how can you gain back the self-respect you feel that you've lost from the carrier that you're with? No carrier will volunteer anything. So ask them what it is you're looking for. Start small, give them a chance, see if they can give you what you're looking for. Step 2, if they continue to deny you, you can't let them away with it, because that gives them the message that they've screwed you a few times and it's okay to keep on doing that. Step 2 then is to seek out a better trucking company, and they are out there. The companies that will treat you fairly and pay you well. Go looking for another place to work. Step 3, if you can't find anything within the trucking industry, it may be time to look elsewhere other than in the trucking industry, because the object of the game is to be treated fairly and to make decent pay. So if it means leaving the trucking industry for a while or forever, you've got to do what you've got to do, because the object of the game is to be paid fairly and be treated with respect. As drivers, we all need to support each other. At Smart Trucking, we don't have all the answers, but we'll try to help wherever and whenever we can. It's our way of giving back to the driver community. But remember this, to earn respect, you have to respect yourself first. So be sure that you do, because God knows you deserve it. Better money, better treatment, and more respect. Drivers, keep the rubber side down, and I will see you on the backhaul.